Hey everyone, and welcome to day 5 of my 12 days of anime videos. Today I'm going to be showing off my top 10 favorite debuts for this year. So what this is, these are a bunch of manga that actually had their first volume released in English this year that are my personal favorites. It's not a comprehensive list. There were far more series that came out this year, including ones that I did buy, but these are just some of my favorites. I also have a couple honorable mentions, and as always, this is again personal opinion, so if you see or if you don't see one of your favorites here, it's not anything against that series. I just probably wouldn't place it on my top favorite debuts for this year. But I'll just get straight into it, and I hope you guys enjoy. So starting with some honorable mentions, all 3 of these are published by 7seas, and they're on my honorable mentions because they're single volumes, so you get the whole story just in one book. I didn't want to put it on the same list as like a bunch of continuing manga, because it's not exactly fair. But these were all ones that I really loved from this year, and I didn't want to exclude them just because of the format they're in. So that would be Claudine by Ryoko Ikeda, a 70s drama about a trans man and his struggles throughout life. Very overly dramatic, very 70s, pretty much what you would expect. Then we have The Bride is a Boy by Chi. This is another trans story, but instead it's an autobiography about the mangaka's own transition and wedding and her sort of experiences being a trans woman in Japan. It's really lovely, really heartwarming and uplifting. And these 2 manga in particular are a really interesting contrast, obviously having sort of similar themes about transgender characters, but completely different types of stories, and it's nice to have that variety available. And thirdly, for my honorable mentions is Go For It Nakamura by Sundae, a really sweet coming of age comedy with hints of romance about a high school boy who has a big fat crush on one of his classmates, but doesn't really have the confidence to actually befriend him. And so it's just really lovely, and about friendship and gaining that confidence in yourself to reach out to other people. It's really wonderful, a great first step for 7seas into their BL category. Some people regard this as not necessarily BL, but I would. It's really good, and all 3 of these are wonderful. Yeah, check them out. Now I'm going to go into my top 10 favorite debuts for this year, and none of these are in any particular order, so my number 1 isn't necessarily higher than my number 10. They're just in whenever I was able to grab them type of order. So first up is Versailles of the Dead by Kumiko Suekane, a supernatural historical manga about pre-revolutionary France and Marie Antoinette in a period where there is also zombies. It's really interesting. I'm a big fan of Suekane's work. I also own her series After School Charisma, which is a sci-fi drama, which also has historical figures in it, but those are via cloning. This is meant to be the actual historical figures. It's really interesting. I love her artwork. I didn't really know a huge amount about this series aside from Marie Antoinette and her brother, so a bit of a plot twist there, and zombies. I didn't know anything else aside from those 3 things. I read this and it exceeded all expectations. There's so much tension, it's so gripping. The supernatural twist is even more than what you expect. And I cannot wait for more volumes of this because the mystery is just so incredibly interesting, and yeah, I'm really excited for more of this series, and yeah, if you are a fan of historical series or supernatural series, especially with zombies and sort of the undead and demons and that sort of thing, definitely check this one out. Next is the debut of a beloved and long-wished series, Silver Spoon, finally coming to us in English by Yen Press, written by Hiromu Arakawa, as many of you probably know, the mangaka of Full Metal Alchemist. This series is completely different to that, although I do actually consider this series her magnum opus. You can tell how much love and how important this series is to Arakawa, how much of her own personal experience, having grown up on a dairy farm, has gone into this series. And even though it is, I guess, a fish out of water comedy coming of age story, there's so many more elements to it in regards to agriculture, but finding yourself and familial responsibility, and, you know, finding your place within society and the world, and even the circle of life, of having to confront this idea of how we consume our food and where that food comes from. It's really, really phenomenal, and I am honestly surprised that it took till 2018 to get this series out. We do already have 5-6 books out, so it has been coming out really, really quickly. And yeah, it's fantastic. I think there's 15 odd volumes in Japan, so we're not quite halfway there yet, but it is being turned out pretty rapidly. It's quite easy to catch up. It's very funny, great cast of characters, and one that I would recommend to pretty much everyone. It is definitely like an all ages manga that can appeal to most everyone. Next is a vertical release, After the Rain by Jun Mayuzuki. This is a 2-in-1 omnibus, which collects obviously the first 2 volumes. And for people unfamiliar with this manga, it does also have an anime available on Amazon streaming service, I believe. And it's about a 17-year-old girl who works at a family restaurant who has a crush on her manager, who's a 45-year-old divorcee. And although that sounds like it could go so wrong so quickly, this isn't really a romance story. It's a story about growing up and finding yourself and recovering after something has happened. Recovering from grief, really. You see this a lot in young people. It's a very natural and common thing to happen, but especially in young girls, young women, after something bad has happened to them, they really attach to the people who have shown them kindness. Thanks to their vulnerability, they just, they see what is pretty typical kindness or love as like a romantic interest, and therefore they grow closer to that person, or they want that person's attention. And that really is the situation in After the Rain. It's this manager having shown pretty human, just typical kindness and understanding towards this young girl who was sort of suffering silently and not really having any direction, not knowing what to do with her life, not knowing what, you know, can't really reach out to her friends and family, and so the kindness that he showed her as a stranger really obviously meant a lot to her, and as such she's grown very, very close and fond and interested in this older man. And thankfully the series never treats it as a reciprocated love. Even when she tells him, he never takes the opportunity to like, oh yes, let's date a young girl, let's date a high school student. It's much more on his side, sort of reflection of the nostalgia of like what it was to be young and to reassess his own life and his own situation and what he wants and how he wants to be happy. So yes, again, this premise could have gone terribly, but it's really, really not what the synopsis is. It's much more than that, and it's a really, really wonderfully, beautifully done series. One that I cannot wait to read more of. Next is another vertical release with a premise that could go so wrong so quickly, and that is My Boy by Hitomi Takano. This is a really lovely story about two lonely people finding friendship and family in each other. We follow a 30-year-old office worker who's being really harassed and bullied at her workplace thanks to her ex-boyfriend, and we have a 12-year-old boy who really is neglected and not valued at home, really isn't cared for by his family. And these two are very different people at very different times in their life, very different scenarios and situations, but they're both lonely and don't really have a connection, a human connection to the outside world, and they find that in each other. They have the inherent understanding of loneliness and feeling like it's you against the world, and it's just absolutely wonderful. So far in the 2 volumes, it hasn't gotten into anything inappropriate romantically. I'm pretty sure the next couple volumes, there's 4 or 5 volumes out in Japan already, it hasn't verged on that at all, so I can confidently say that, at least with the first 2 volumes, it's just really touching and a really well done, aware, delicate story about found family and the importance of emotional connection with other people. It's really lovely. I would highly, highly, highly recommend it if that sounds interesting to you. And yes, really looking forward to more volumes of this. Next is Sato Kinara by Upechika. This is a 4-volume series being released by 7 Seas and is a story about 2 young women who live in the United States who are roommates. One is from Japan, the other is from Saudi Arabia, and it's a meeting of cultures and sort of understanding both sides, mostly of course focusing on Islam and being a Muslim woman, because most readers presumably would understand being Japanese, but also their life as obviously foreign residents living within the United States and the clash of cultures there as well. It's really, really lovely and sweet. I absolutely adored it. It's funny. It's got a lot of pretty relatable content in there for people who do have friends who are Muslims or are Muslims themselves. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to certain aspects of this manga. But even if you're not, there are some of the Americans. There's a like standard Caucasian friends that they have from the US. There's also a Asian American friend. So it's really like a whole bunch of different personalities, a bunch of Muslim women from other countries, not just from Saudi Arabia. One's from Afghanistan and one is from somewhere else I can't quite remember, but also the differences, the subtle differences between them and their culture and obviously how they live. It's really, really, really good. I would definitely recommend it. Again, this is a pretty short series. There's only 4 volumes in all, so not a huge commitment, but I think that's the perfect length for a story of this type. I feel if it was any longer, it would get pretty repetitive, so it's long enough that you have time to spend with these characters and love them and really enjoy their day-to-day lives without feeling like it's being drawn out and, as I said, repetitive and getting, you know, just overwhelming with the same thing happening over and over again with minor variants. It's really, really wonderful. Again, this is a really interesting and unusual series, and I'm really, really happy that 7 Seas decided to put this series out. Next on my list is Mob Psycho 100 by the mangaka or the story writer of One Punch Man, mangaka of this one. And this follows a middle school boy who has ESP or psychokinetic powers and his life. It's sort of a kind of a action slice of life growing up, coming of age story about Mob finding his place and going through puberty and learning about himself and becoming more comfortable with himself. He is the assistant or protege kind of Reagan, who is a spiritual advisor and also a huge con man, has no psychokinetic or spiritual abilities of his own and just takes advantage of Mob's great power. But he also acts as probably the best role model for Mob in his life. This is a hilarious series, but with a lot of heart, a lot of really great characters, a lot of really funny scenarios, and this is another series that I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with thanks to the anime. The second season is coming next year, and I cannot wait for it. This is being released by Dark Horse, who have not always been the best with getting their books out or keeping things in print or continuing or finishing them, but they have said recently that they're really concentrating on their manga and hoping to gain sort of more traction with it, because obviously they have some of their really popular series like Berserk and Blade of the Immortal, who continue to go strong, get a lot of advertising, have a lot of people talking about them, so there's a lot of buzz. But unfortunately some of their lesser known titles don't have that, and I don't want Mob to remain unfinished in English. We do have up to volume 3 out of the 16 already solicited in English, so let's hope that a quicker release schedule will encourage people to buy them and keep the, I guess, hype and the train going for this series whilst people are still talking about it and are aware of it. It's one that I've been looking forward to for a very long time, and this first volume did not disappoint. If you are a fan of the anime, I would definitely recommend you pick up the manga. And yes, it's just absolutely, absolutely wonderful. I honestly prefer this series compared to One Punch Man. It has more heart to it than that series. I think Mob is much more of an interesting character. Not to say that Saitama is a bad character, but I think the whole premise of this one just works better for me. And I'm super, super glad that we have actually gotten this in English after so long. Next was an unusual series from Viz, and that is Blue Sky, That Blue Sky Feeling, written by Okuda and with art by Komahashi. This is another coming of age story about two high school boys, one who's a recent transfer student, one who's the class loner, very ostracized from his peers, and their friendship, as well as a girl from another class who was this loner guy's only friend. And also our main character, the transfer student, realizing that the reason this other boy is so standoffish, is really a loner by choice, is because of rumors that he's gay and that people are making fun of him and all of these sorts of things, which he later finds out is actually not just rumors, it's true. And so his perception of this other boy and his understanding of like being gay and what it means to be gay and that sort of thing, his own prejudices and biases, is brought to the forefront as he examines why people see someone as being gay as a reason to bully them or a reason to not be their friend. It's really well done. This is, I think, technically like a BL story, but it's printed under Viz's imprint, like normal Viz imprint, so it's not under their Sublime series type thing. So it's not really categorized with their normal yaoi or BL, which I think is really great because this is not so much... there's certainly a romance aspect to it, but that's not what this story is really about. It's about self-expression and self-realization and growing up and obviously figuring yourself out. It's a very difficult time in your life, puberty, when you're growing up and trying to find out where you fit amongst your peers and amongst society. It's really, really, really well done. I had heard nothing but great things about this series going into it, and I was not disappointed. If that sort of very wonderful, character-driven story is something that you enjoy, that blue sky feeling is one that you should definitely look into because it was really, really strong and a wonderful start to this series. Next on the list is a debut that I didn't even realize debuted this year because we already have 5 or 6 volumes out in English already, and that is Again by Mitsuru Kubo. So obviously this series has been coming out really, really quickly, and over this last year, Mitsuru Kubo has become one of my favorite comic writers and artists of all time. I love how she writes her works, how she can even do paneling and character expression and everything else. She's amazing. And this series is, in my opinion, the better of the 2 that did come out from her this year. Again is a story about a high school boy who on the day of his graduation falls down the stairs and wakes up on the first day of school, giving him the opportunity to relive the last 3 years of his life or redo his high school experience. In his original life, he was very much a loner, labeled as a delinquent, didn't get on with anybody, but now he wants to try and find out what happened to the school's Uendan, which he was quite curious about but never really commit to originally. Now he wants to know what actually happened, find out what's going on, and to see if he can save the club from itself. It's so good. It goes in so many unpredictable directions, but in a good sense. It doesn't feel like it's just being pulled out of nowhere, but it doesn't feel really like what you're expecting. This series is funny, emotionally, like, quite heavy and really, really relatable, I think, to anyone. It's so good. I'm really looking forward to volume 6, which is the next one that I need to read. And if you haven't given either of Kubo's series a try, my opinion, as I said, Again is stronger. Moteki has finished, but this one is 12 volumes long. We're halfway through, and it just continues to get better and better and better over the course of the story. I cannot recommend this series highly enough, and it's one of my absolute favorite series that debuted this year, bar none. Next is Tokyo Tarareba Girls, put out by Kodansha, but written and illustrated by Akiko Higashimura. This is a phenomenal josei series about 3 women who are 33 years old, who are all at this point in their life where they don't feel like they've done enough. Our main character feels like her work stagnated. There's no upward or forward momentum for her. She's single, she's never had kids or really a long-term committed relationship. So she and her friends sort of pledge to find partners or be married by the Tokyo 2020 Olympics, which is a interesting idea. But I really, really, love Higashimura's work. I'm a huge fan of Princess Jellyfish, as most everyone probably knows. But this story, I think, really, even more so than Princess Jellyfish, hits that part of society of this expectation, especially in women, but in everybody, about having to have done things by a certain point in your life, having to have achieved something by age 25 or 30 or whatever it may be. It's really, really well done with how true to life this desperation can feel for a lot of people. And Higashimura can talk about these really somewhat almost dark and depressing things within society and culture with really, really bitingly sharp comedy and satire, and it's just done so well. I'm really looking forward to her other series, Blank Canvas, coming out next year, but this series got its print debut this year. It was also previously available, or still is previously available in its entirety digitally, and this is one of the first digital titles that Kodansha has brought to the market. So this and Grand Blue Dreaming and a couple other things started digital first, and I'm glad that enough support and interest was shown to get a print release for it. Tokyo Tarareba Girls is one of Higashimura's wonderful josei. If you're a fan of josei, I would definitely encourage you to read it. And whilst I wouldn't say that this should be your first josei title, if you are wanting to expand your experience with the genre, this is definitely one to pick up. And last but certainly not least, we have Go Nagai's Devilman, the classic collection by 7C. This is, of course, the hardcover omnibus release of Nagai's classic Devilman, and available for the first time in English legally. Of course, I'm sure many people are aware that Devilman has had a recent resurgence thanks to the Netflix anime adaptation, and so this series is one that's incredibly hot right now. I think a lot of people really want to read it and watch it and experience the story, and now having this available, this really influential classic manga, is a step towards so much more within manga. I really like Devilman. Of course, like most people, I've seen the recent Crybaby anime, one that I was always going to watch because I love the director and his work. But also I have seen and do actually enjoy the old funny dubbed OVA series, which I think a lot of the older generation of anime fans are aware of, and that Discotheque just recently re-released on Blu-ray. This is a series with cultural significance, so much influence within so many genres, and of course, as I said, a modern adaptation with wide reach that a lot of people have seen and experienced and loved. Having a series like this available in English is really, really exciting. The story itself is wonderful and goes in so many directions. It gets crazy quickly, really dark, and it is the story about, again, a high school student who, after reuniting with a childhood friend, becomes a demon that helps to protect the earth from attacks from heaven. It's sort of a bit all over the place. There's a lot of Christian iconography and obviously ideology ideas in there, not necessarily following any proper understanding of the Bible or Christian teachings. But it's so beautiful and complex and so many wonderful things. Plus, of course, it has a really lovingly done translation that doesn't ignore the almost meme-y quality to this series, because the art isn't fantastic. It's gone through a million different changes over the years. This series is iconic for some hilarious lines and panel progression, and 7Seas was well aware of that. With this release, they've retained so much of that enthusiastic fan translation and how people recognize the series, whilst also giving the most accurate version of the series than what we've gotten before. It's so good. If you are wanting to start to get into classic manga, there are quite a few out coming now, but getting into this 7 Seas line, this was a fantastic first step. They also have quite a few other series too, so check them out, and I'm looking forward to the future with 7 Seas and their classics range. So that was my top 10 plus 3 honorable mentions of my favorite debuts of 2018. So many good manga came out this year. Ones that I couldn't put into this video because, well, I could have, because 10 is such an arbitrary number. But that I didn't even mention, a lot that I have read maybe digitally and don't even have the book to show off, or ones that I do have the books but just didn't really make the short list for, or ones that I haven't even read or tried. I'm sure plenty of you guys have other series that you're following that you'd have on your list. It's a really great time in manga. This year has been wonderful. Next year will be wonderful, and for the foreseeable future there's so much to look forward to. Let me know what your top 10 or some of your favorites debuts for this year have been in the comments if you'd like. I like to compare and contrast and see if there's anything that maybe I missed. Maybe I wasn't paying attention and just didn't realize. Or ones that I haven't even heard of or tried yet. So, yeah, let me know, and I'll catch you in the next video, guys. Bye till then.